Archer. Some rambling thoughts. So this is part of what I've been calling my television addiction series, in which I go through and talk about all the TV shows I watched in 2011 and 2012 when I was living in Cambodia and was watching way too much TV because I had access to all the cheap DVDs which were being sold there. For more information on exactly what this project is and why I decided to do that, you can watch the introductory video, which I'll link to in the description down below. But for today, talking about Archer. So I suspect most people on the internet are already very familiar with this show and don't need an introduction to it. And yet, on the off chance maybe somebody is not familiar with it, I'll try and say some brief words about it. It's a comedy cartoon set in the modern day, but evoking the aesthetics of the old James Bond era films, with maybe the Jonny Quest style of old cartoons. There's a rather jerky movement to the characters, which seems to be evoking the old 1960s and 1970s cartoons, and the angular style of the characters also seems to be evoking maybe the Jonny Quest era of cartoons. So it's got a very cool retro spy era look. And I'm a sucker for those type of things. I love retro stuff. So when I first started seeing the previews for this show, I thought the aesthetics of it looked very cool. On the other hand, I was not overly impressed with what seemed to be the humor. And you know, it's always hard to judge these things off of commercials. But the commercials I did see for it when I was watching regular TV, and there were several commercials for this back around 2011, 2012. I seem to remember constantly seeing commercials for this on the TV. Didn't impress me overly, but I had a couple coworkers who just loved this show and talked endlessly about how funny it was, and I picked it up on their recommendation. One of my coworkers actually compared it to the Flashman series. This is one of my coworkers who was a big Flashman fan. And I've talked about the Flashman series before on this channel. It's if you're not familiar, it's a series of historical fiction books about a disreputable officer in the British Army in the 19th century. Well, disreputable is maybe the wrong way of saying it. He's perfectly reputable in his day. In other words, he's able to do a lot of dishonorable things, but still acquire a good reputation. So it's not an exact one-to-one comparison, but the idea of maybe an anti-hero, the idea of a hero who looks the part, looks like a dashing hero, but is completely cowardly and does all these dishonorable things. Maybe has a parallel with Archer. I don't know. Maybe it's not fair to call Archer cowardly, actually. Most of the time he's pretty brave for his job, but he is completely selfish. So maybe in that respect he's analogous to Flashman. Anyways, I'm rambling. Sorry. Point being, I checked this out on the coworker's recommendation and found it entirely watchable. Very entertaining. I believe I watched the first 4 seasons and maybe part of the 5th season. I stopped watching around about the time they did that whole Archer Vice turnaround, where the spy organization became I believe it was a drug dealer organization. Not because I had any... Not because that particular plot offended me or anything like that, but I think it was a combination of, one, I was moving out of the television addiction phase of my life at that point, so I had stopped watching as much TV. And then 2, I was probably just getting a little sick of Archer at that time, because the jokes are very repetitive. And I know to a large extent the repetitiveness of the jokes is the joke. I mean, it's one of those series similar to maybe Parks or Recreations or other series where constant callbacks to a particular joke are supposed to build on each other so that the constant referencing to something is supposed to get more and more ludicrous as you watch it, and that is supposed to be the joke. At the same time, though, it can get maybe a little bit tiring after a while. Well, I don't know. Your mileage may vary on this. I was thinking, actually, a lot of shows do this, and maybe another show, which very obviously does this, is Get Smart. And, you know, maybe Get Smart is similar to Archer in some ways. I mean, not in every way, obviously, but it is another comedy about a spy organization. And it's a lot more innocent than Archer is, and it's a lot more corny than Archer is. But it is, the basic premise maybe isn't all that far removed. And boy, Get Smart, if you remember the reruns of this show, or, you know, if you remember the original show from the late 1960s, they would have the same jokes in every episode, right? The cone of silence, the would you believe, the you know, all these one-liners that Maxwell Smart was famous for having. Point being, I guess, a lot of shows do this, where they have these callbacks to these one-liners that characters are famous for saying. But I started to feel like the humor was not as fresh, maybe, after several seasons of watching it. But that said, I did enjoy those several seasons I saw. The other thing which I think maybe limited my viewing of it to 4 seasons or so is you don't really get invested in these characters. So, you know, characters like Ray or Cyril, you're not really supposed to feel emotionally attached to them. In fact, quite the opposite. You're constantly supposed to be laughing at how they're the punch bags, or how their lives are getting screwed up, or how they're the recipients of whatever Archer's doing that backfires. It's kind of almost like a Looney Tunes-esque thing, where you're kind of laughing at the characters, but not really developing any deep empathy with them. And that's fine for what it is. But I think if you're going to watch a show and stick with it, with how many seasons is Archer up to now? 10 seasons or something? At least it's difficult for me to really invest in a show for that long of a time if I don't care about the characters at all. Now, I am aware that they've done a number of interesting things to reinvent the show, and I've seen some of this by just catching the odd episode on TV every now and again. In other words, I haven't methodically... I haven't gotten a DVD set and worked my way through the whole season since season 4. But I've caught up with the show sporadically on TV, or, you know, if I'm on vacation and it's playing on TV in the hotel or something like that. And so in that way, I've seen some of the Dreamland episodes. Some of the episodes where he's on the Jungle Island. I forget what the name of that season is supposed to be. So, you know, the show, I am aware that the show has reinvented itself in a number of interesting ways. And I found those episodes interesting when I watched them. But knowing that those episodes are all a dream and they're completely disconnected from the continuity makes you care about the characters even less. But it's interesting for what it is. And I mentioned the aesthetics of this show as one of the things that is initially one of the hooks. And that's definitely true with some of these later seasons, where they recreate the aesthetics of, you know, a 1930s jungle adventure, or 1940s Hollywood, or, you know, a futuristic space movie. The main actor in Archer is a guy, I believe his name is H. Jon Benjamin, if I'm remembering that right. And he's a famous actor and famous voice actor. Well, sorry, famous is maybe the wrong word. He's been in tons of stuff. If you look him up on IMDb and look him up on Wikipedia. I didn't realize this initially, but he was also in Home Movies. Home Movies is an animated show that ran on Comedy Central. I think it was from 2004 to 2009. I watched a lot of it in 2010 when I was in graduate school and procrastinating on writing my thesis. Because for whatever reason, there were loads of episodes on YouTube. I think there still are loads of episodes on YouTube, like full episodes. I don't know why, but I guess the copyright holders of that show have not been cracking down on YouTube for whatever reason. So it's a very easy show to find episodes of and watch it on YouTube. And it's not the greatest show ever, but it's watchable. And John H. Benjamin does a number of... Sorry, John H. Benjamin? Or is it H. John Benjamin? Should have written this down before the review. But he does a number of characters on that show, but I think the most notable is Coach McGuirk. Coach McGuirk is like the funniest character on that show. And H. John Benjamin just does a great job as him on that show. He was also plays the Carl character in Family Guy. Chris's boss at the convenience store who always wants to talk about movies he's seen. So he does a number of interesting characters. And he's perfect as Archer. Just this perfect combination of arrogance and cluelessness. There's a number of other interesting actors. I think there's a number of actors from Arrested Development who are on Archer. And I'm going to blank on their names, aren't I? But Archer's mother was one of the Arrested Development actresses. And Pam, I think, is played by Judy Greer, who was also on Arrested Development. And Jeffrey Tambor from Arrested Development shows up in some of the episodes. So there's this connection between the voice actors in Arrested Development, which is cool if you're a fan of both shows. What else do I want to say about it? Changing topics briefly here. I once read long ago, way back in the 90s, a philosophy paper written by a college undergrad about The Simpsons, where he said that The Simpsons was unique because they combined lowbrow humor with highbrow humor. It was unique at the time. Anyways, at this point in the game, loads of shows have copied the humor style of The Simpsons. But Archer is another show where this is very true. There's so much lowbrow or crass humor in this series. And yet there are all these references that you won't get unless you've taken like some college level literature courses or something like that. You know, there's references to Salvador Dali or to famous books, 19th century Russian authors. There are all these like little references crammed in there. No, sorry, crammed is the wrong word. Crammed implies it's just tons of them. They're sporadic, but they are there. So it's I don't want to say it's a completely dumb show by any means, because it does have these references, although I think they're mostly surface level references. If they were any deeper than that, I certainly missed them. So, what else do I want to say about this show? I really don't know if I have that much more intelligent commentary to say about it. It was an interesting aesthetic. I didn't really get invested into any of the characters. You're not meant to get invested into any of the characters in this show. It's funny for what it was. I tired of it after about 4 seasons. But, you know, 4 seasons is still a lot of TV watching. So I did work my way through the first 4 seasons of the DVDs of Archer. And completely enjoyed it. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out already, it's worth checking out. But let's face it, you've probably seen this show already. I imagine most people have already seen it. So let me know in the comments what you thought of it. And I'm going to finish this review here.